The afternoon of July 29th, 1944, near Roncey, France, Oberleutnant Friedrich Marten stood in the commander's hatch of his Panzer Mark Four, watching the road ahead disappear into haze and smoke. Behind him stretched nearly 3 miles of German armour and transport, 66 tanks, 200 vehicles, 11 artillery pieces, the remnants of an entire armoured division trapped between advancing American ground forces and the hedgerows of Normandy. The column had stopped moving. Marten knew why. American Sherman tanks from the 2nd and 3rd Armoured Divisions had blocked the road ahead near Saint Denis le Vetu. Behind them, more American armour sealed the escape route near Roncey. His division sat motionless in a natural kill zone, packed bumper to bumper on a country road too narrow for tactical manoeuvring. Then he heard it, a sound that had become Germany's nightmare. The deep-throated growl of Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines. Multiple aircraft, coming fast and low. Marten looked up and felt his stomach drop. 8 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts materialized from the northwest, their massive radial engines creating that distinctive rumble that German soldiers had learned to fear across every battlefield in France. Each Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning M 250 caliber machine guns, loaded with 2,500 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. The combined firepower of the flight exceeded 17,000 rounds. Every 5th bullet was a tracer that would mark death's trajectory with orange light. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Marten's column was about to experience what American pilots called a turkey shoot. The lead Thunderbolt rolled into its attack dive. The pilot, Captain Robert Brooking of the 405th Fighter Group's 509th Squadron, had spotted the trapped German column 15 minutes earlier during an armed reconnaissance sweep. He had immediately radioed for every available P-47 inches the sector to converge on his position. What followed would become one of the most devastating single-day ground attacks of the entire Normandy campaign. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The German army had entered France in June of 1944, believing their tactical doctrine and combat experience would offset American material advantages. Wehrmacht officers understood that American forces possessed superior numbers and industrial capacity, but they counted on German fighting skill and battlefield experience to achieve local victories that might stabilize defensive lines. The Panzer divisions trapped near Roncey represented the cream of German armoured forces in Normandy. These were not hastily trained replacement units, but veteran formations that had fought across multiple theatres. Their tanks, primarily Panzer, Mark Fours and Panthers, outmatched American Shermans in direct combat. Their crews knew their business. Under normal circumstances, they could manoeuvre and fight effectively against numerically superior opponents. But these were not normal circumstances. Operation Cobra, the American breakout from the Normandy beachhead, had shattered German defensive positions through the concentrated application of overwhelming firepower. On July 25th, 1,800 Allied heavy bombers had dropped 3,300 tons of high explosive on German positions near Saint-Lô. The bombing created a gap through which American armoured divisions poured into the German rear areas with shocking speed. German command structure fractured under the pace of American advance. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, commanding Army Group B, ordered counterattacks that could not be coordinated because American air power interrupted German communications and movement. Panzer divisions that should have been concentrating for coordinated strikes instead found themselves scattered across the Norman countryside, reacting to American advances rather than executing coherent defensive plans. The column trapped near Roncey represented a microcosm of German difficulties. These units were attempting to consolidate for a coordinated counterattack when American ground forces enveloped them from multiple directions. The road through Roncey offered the only viable escape route, but American armour had blocked both ends of that route, creating a 3-mile-long parking lot filled with irreplaceable German war material. Captain Brooking's Thunderbolt dove toward the head of the column at 400 miles per hour. His aircraft shuddered as all 8 machine guns opened fire simultaneously. The concentrated stream of 50-caliber bullets struck the lead panzer with kinetic energy equivalent to multiple artillery shells hitting per second. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through the tank's engine deck, igniting fuel and ammunition. The panzer exploded, not the Hollywood fireball of burning gasoline, but the catastrophic detonation of ammunition cooking off inside the hull. The turret lifted 10 feet into the air and crashed back down at an angle. Secondary explosions ripped through the vehicle as stored ammunition continued to detonate. Black smoke billowed upward, marking the kill for every P-47 pilot converging on the target area. Brookings' wingmen followed in sequence, each pilot selecting different targets along the column. The second Thunderbolt engaged a Panther tank 400 yards behind the burning Panzer Four. 8 machine guns converged on the Panther's thinner rear armor. 50-caliber rounds penetrated the engine compartment, destroying the Maybach power plant and setting fire to the external fuel tanks that German crews mounted on their vehicles to extend operational range. The third and fourth Thunderbolts strafed half-tracks and supply trucks in the center of the column. 50-caliber ammunition designed to destroy aircraft proved devastatingly effective against thin-skinned vehicles. Trucks disintegrated under the onslaught. Half-tracks shed armor plate like confetti. Fuel trucks exploded in massive fireballs that spread burning petroleum across the road and adjacent fields. Within 90 seconds of the initial attack, the German column had lost mobility at 3 critical points. The burning Panzer Four blocked forward movement. Destroyed vehicles in the column's center created impassable obstacles. The burning Panther sealed the rear. Every vehicle between these points sat motionless, unable to maneuver. Perfect targets for the additional Thunderbolt flights now arriving over the battlefield. Marten watched in horror as more P-47 seconds materialized from every compass direction. The 405th Fighter Group had committed every available aircraft to the attack. 32 Thunderbolts in multiple flights began systematic destruction of his immobilized column. The attacks came in waves, each flight making multiple strafing runs before climbing to altitude to allow the next flight to engage. American fighter-bomber tactics had evolved through 2 years of combat experience in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, before being perfected in Normandy. Pilots learned to coordinate their attacks to maintain continuous pressure on ground targets. While one flight strafed, another orbited at altitude, watching for German anti-aircraft fire and selecting the next targets. A third flight returned to base to rearm and refuel. The rotation meant that German forces under attack faced constant aerial assault with no respite. The P-47's rugged construction allowed pilots to press attacks through defensive fire that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. The Thunderbolt's radial engine could absorb multiple hits and continue functioning. The aircraft's robust airframe and redundant systems meant that damaged Thunderbolts often returned to base with battle damage that would have been fatal to more lightly built fighters. This survivability encouraged aggressive tactics. Thunderbolt pilots dove low over their targets, releasing their ordnance and firing their machine guns from ranges where accuracy was guaranteed. They pulled out of their dives mere feet above the ground, trusting their aircraft's strength and power to carry them through defensive fire and back to altitude for another attack run. The German soldiers trapped in Marten's column experienced this assault as an endless succession of engine roars, gunfire, and explosions. Each strafing run lasted seconds but felt eternal. The sound of 50-caliber rounds impacting metal created a distinctive tearing noise that survivors would remember for the rest of their lives. The visual effect was equally traumatic. Orange tracers arced down from diving aircraft, marking streams of invisible bullets that tore through armor, flesh, and equipment with equal facility. German anti-aircraft crews attempted to defend the column. 2 88mm flak guns opened fire, sending shells arcing toward the attacking Thunderbolts. One P-47 took hits in the wing but continued its attack run before climbing away trailing smoke. The pilot radioed that he had lost hydraulic pressure, but his engine still functioned. He would attempt to return to base for emergency landing. The flak guns became priority targets for subsequent attacks. Thunderbolt pilots recognized the distinctive muzzle flashes and smoke trails of anti-aircraft fire. Two P-47's rolled into coordinated attacks on the German flak positions, approaching from different angles to divide defensive fire. 8 machine guns per aircraft meant 16 streams of 50 caliber bullets converging on each gun position. The first flak gun vanished in a cloud of smoke and debris. Direct hits from armor-piercing rounds destroyed the gun mechanism and killed or wounded the crew. The second gun continued firing for another 30 seconds before a Thunderbolt strafing run severed the barrel and overturned the entire mounting. Without effective anti-aircraft defense, the German column lay completely exposed to continued American air assault. The attack continued for over 6 hours. As individual P-47's expended their ammunition, they returned to forward airfields near the beachhead, rearmed in minutes, and returned to continue the assault. American ground crews had perfected rapid turnaround procedures. Thunderbolts taxied to revetments where crews waited with ammunition belts, fuel hoses, and ordnance ready to load. Aircraft that landed with empty guns and fuel tanks were refueled, rearmed, and airborne again in under 20 minutes. This logistics capability gave American air power a sustained presence over battlefields that German forces could not counter. Luftwaffe fighters attempting to interfere with ground attack operations had to travel from distant airfields, arriving with limited fuel and ammunition. American P-47's operated from fields mere minutes, flying time from the front lines, allowing multiple sorties per day per aircraft. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the trapped German column had been transformed into a 3-mile-long corridor of destruction. Marten's Panzer had taken multiple hits, but miraculously remained functional. His driver and radio operator were dead, killed when 50 caliber rounds penetrated the thin roof armor and ricocheted through the crew compartment. Marten himself had burns on his face and hands from a near miss that had sprayed burning fuel across his position. All around him, the column burned. Tanks sat at odd angles, their tracks blown off by repeated strafing runs. Half-tracks lay overturned in ditches where desperate crews had attempted to escape the road. Trucks burned with thick black smoke that rose hundreds of feet into the summer sky. The dead lay everywhere, victims of machine gun fire, or crushed under vehicles that had been pushed off the road by subsequent explosions. German survivors huddled in ditches and under disabled vehicles, praying the next strafing run would miss their positions. Some attempted to flee across open fields, but were cut down by ranging machine gun fire from orbiting Thunderbolts. Others stayed with their vehicles, unable to abandon equipment that represented Germany's dwindling armoured strength. As darkness approached, the Thunderbolt attacks finally ceased. American pilots could no longer identify targets in failing light. The 405th Fighter Group returned to base, their pilots exhausted but grimly satisfied with the day's work. Intelligence officers would later confirm, through ground reconnaissance, that 66 tanks had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. 204 additional vehicles lay wrecked along 3 miles of Norman countryside. 11 artillery pieces had been abandoned or destroyed. The human cost was equally devastating. Over 600 German soldiers were dead or wounded. Survivors faced capture by American ground forces, who would reach the area within hours. The column's destruction eliminated an entire German armoured division as an effective fighting force, removing precious combat power that could not be replaced or reconstituted. The American pilots who executed the attack had achieved this result at minimal cost. One P-47 had been damaged by flak but successfully returned to base. No American aircraft were lost. No pilots were killed or wounded. The exchange rate favoured the Americans by margins that made continued German resistance strategically futile. The technical explanation for the Roncey massacre lay in the intersection of American engineering philosophy and battlefield in reality. German tank designers had focused their efforts on creating impenetrable frontal armour. The Tiger tank's frontal plates measured 102 mm thick. The Panther's glacis plate was 80 mm of sloped armour that could deflect even the most powerful Allied anti-tank rounds. German doctrine assumed that tanks would engage enemies from the front, where their armour superiority was absolute. But the Thunderbolt's 50-caliber machine guns did not engage from the front. Captain Brooking and his fellow pilots had discovered through combat experience that German tanks possessed a critical vulnerability that no amount of frontal armor could protect. The engine deck, every German tank, from the Panzer Mark III to the mighty Tiger, featured thin armor gratings over the rear engine compartment. These gratings allowed airflow to cool the massive engines that powered German armor. They measured between 20 and 30 millimeters thick, designed only to protect against shell fragments and small arms fire. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds fired from P-47 machine guns carried sufficient kinetic energy at 400 yards range to penetrate these thin gratings. Once through the deck armor, the bullets struck fuel lines, oil reservoirs, and ammunition storage. The incendiary component of the ammunition ignited petroleum products instantly. Within seconds, a tank struck from above would erupt in flames as its own fuel supply became the instrument of its destruction. German tank crews had trained extensively for frontal engagements. They understood how to angle their armor to maximize protection. They knew how to use terrain to shield vulnerable side armor. But German training manuals contained no procedures for defending against attacks from directly above. The concept of aerial strafing as an anti-tank tactic had not been seriously considered when German armor doctrine was developed in the 1930s. Marten watched another Panther explode as a P-47's strafing run found the engine deck. The turret crew never had time to traverse their main gun toward the attacking aircraft. By the time they identified the threat, Thunderbolt had already completed its attack run and was climbing back to altitude. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 seconds. 5 seconds to destroy a tank that had cost the Reich 60,000 man-hours to manufacture and 2 years to crew with trained personnel. The psychological impact on surviving German tank crews was profound and immediate. These men had fought Soviet T-34 seconds on the Eastern Front. They had engaged British Churchills in North Africa. They understood tank combat as a contest between armoured vehicles, where superior training and equipment could overcome numerical disadvantages. The P-47 attacks represented something entirely different, an enemy that attacked from a dimension their training had not prepared them to defend against. German company commanders attempted to organise anti-aircraft defence using whatever weapons remained functional. Machine gunners fired at the attacking Thunderbolts with small arms that could not reach the altitude from which American pilots initiated their dives. The few surviving anti-aircraft guns had been positioned for defense against high-altitude bombers, not low-level attack aircraft that approached at 400 miles per hour. The Thunderbolt's attack profile exploited this gap in German defensive capabilities. Pilots dove from 12,000 feet, building airspeed that carried them through the effective range of German anti-aircraft fire in seconds. They fired their machine guns at ranges between 400 and 600 yards, close enough for devastating accuracy, but far enough to allow pull-out before striking the ground. The combination of speed, altitude, and firepower created an attack profile that German defenders could not counter with available weapons. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. American pilots developed their strafing techniques through systematic trial and error across multiple theaters of operations. In North Africa, P-47 pilots discovered that diving attacks delivered more accurate fire than level strafing runs. In Sicily, they learned that attacking from the rear quarter gave them longer time over target and better angles on engine compartments. In Italy, they refined ammunition selection, discovering that armor-piercing incendiary rounds were far more effective than standard ball ammunition against armored vehicles. By July of 1944, when the 405th Fighter Group attacked the column near Roncey, American pilots had accumulated 2 years of ground attack experience. They understood the vulnerabilities of German armor. They knew which angles of attack were most effective. They had developed communication procedures that allowed multiple aircraft to coordinate attacks without colliding or duplicating effort. The German forces trapped at Roncey faced the culmination of this learning process. Each P-47 pilot knew exactly where to aim, exactly what ammunition to use, exactly how to approach to maximize effect while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. The result was not combat in any traditional sense. It was systematic industrial destruction delivered by pilots who treated tank killing as a technical problem solved through engineering and experience. The afternoon wore on. More P-47 seconds arrived as those that had expended their ammunition returned to base, rearmed, and flew back to continue the attack. The rotation ensured continuous pressure on the German column. There was never a moment when German forces were not under direct attack or immediate threat of attack. This sustained pressure prevented any attempt at organized defense or escape. Marten made his decision as the shadows began to lengthen. His tank was damaged but mobile. His crew was reduced to himself and his gunner. The loader and driver lay dead in the hull. He could stay with his vehicle and die when the next strafing run found his position, or he could abandon the tank and attempt to escape on foot through the Norman countryside. He chose survival. Opening his commander's hatch, he climbed out onto the turret and dropped to the ground. His gunner followed. Together they ran toward a hedgerow 50 meters from the road. Around them, other German soldiers were making the same calculation. The column was transforming from an organized military formation into a mob of individual survivors, seeking any shelter from the aerial onslaught. A P-47 spotted the movement. The pilot rolled into a shallow dive and opened fire with his machine guns. Tracers arced toward the running men. Marten dove behind a stone wall as 50 caliber rounds chewed chunks from the ancient masonry. He pressed himself flat against the ground and waited for death. The bullets stopped. The Thunderbolt climbed away, its pilot selecting a more valuable target. A tank was worth more kills in the official tally than individual soldiers. Marten lay gasping behind his inadequate cover, realizing that he had survived only because German armor was so plentiful that American pilots could afford to ignore infantry targets. As darkness finally ended the attacks, Marten surveyed the destruction. The road was impassable. Burning vehicles created a continuous line of fire that would burn through the night. The ammunition cooking off inside destroyed tanks created sporadic explosions that lit the countryside with orange flashes. The smell of burning metal, petroleum, and flesh created a stench that would linger for weeks. Ground reconnaissance teams from the American 2nd Armored Division reached the area the following morning. Intelligence officers walked the length of the column, photographing and cataloguing the destruction. Their after-action report documented 66 tanks destroyed or damaged beyond repair, 204 vehicles of all types rendered inoperative, 11 artillery pieces were abandoned by their crews. The report estimated German casualties at over 600 men killed or wounded. The American losses for this operation totaled 1 P-47 damaged by anti-aircraft fire. The pilot had successfully returned to base. No American aircraft were destroyed, no American pilots were killed or captured. The exchange ratio defied every historical precedent for ground attack operations. Traditional doctrine suggested that attacking fortified positions or armored forces would result in significant attacker casualties. The Roncey attack had demonstrated that American air power could destroy concentrated armor formations with near impunity. Wehrmacht commanders reviewing the Roncey after-action reports struggled to develop tactical responses. The obvious solution was to avoid concentrating forces where American air power could attack them. But dispersed forces could not achieve the concentration necessary for effective counterattacks. German armies faced an insoluble tactical dilemma: concentrate and be destroyed by air power, or disperse and lack the combat power to achieve battlefield objectives. General Hans Eberbach, commanding Panzer Group West during the Normandy campaign, attempted to develop new tactical procedures for operating under Allied air supremacy. His orders emphasized movement only during darkness or bad weather. They mandated dispersion of vehicles to prevent multiple losses from single attacks. They required constant reconnaissance for approaching aircraft and immediate dispersal when air attack was imminent. These procedures reduced casualties, but eliminated the operational tempo necessary for effective armored warfare. Tank formations that should have been able to move 50 miles in a day were reduced to 10 or 15 miles of night movement. Counterattacks that required concentration of armor at specific times and places became impossible to coordinate because the constituent units could not risk moving during daylight. The Battle of Normandy became a demonstration of what military theorists would later call air-land integration. American ground forces advanced knowing that their air assets would suppress German counterattacks before those attacks could develop. American commanders could plan operations based on the assumption that German armor would be interdicted during movement and could not concentrate effectively. The psychological effect on German soldiers extended beyond fear of immediate death. It created a pervasive sense of helplessness that eroded military discipline and combat effectiveness. German veterans of the Eastern Front had faced overwhelming Soviet attacks and maintained unit cohesion through belief that German tactical skill could overcome numerical disadvantages. Against American air power, no amount of tactical skill mattered. Survival became random chance rather than the product of training and experience. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding elements of the 21st Panzer Division in 19Cs, Normandy, described the psychological impact in his post-war memoir. His veterans, hardened by years of combat across multiple theaters, broke psychologically when exposed to sustained American air attack. Men who had faced Soviet armor assaults without flinching cowered in foxholes when they heard P-47 engines. The distinctive sound of the R-2800 radial engine became associated with inevitable death. The Roncey attack represented one engagement among hundreds that occurred across Normandy during Operation Cobra and the subsequent pursuit across France. American Thunderbolt squadrons flew thousands of ground attack sorties during July and August of 1944. They destroyed German armor faster than German industry could replace it. They interdicted German supply lines more effectively than any ground force could have achieved. They created conditions where German tactical excellence became irrelevant because German forces could not maneuver to employ their advantages. The statistical evidence was overwhelming. From D-Day on June 6th through the end of August 1944, P-47 pilots claimed destruction of over 6,000 German armoured vehicles across all types. Post-war analysis confirmed that while some claims were duplicated or overstated, the actual number of German armoured vehicles destroyed by American air attack exceeded 4,000. This represented nearly the entire German armoured strength committed to the Normandy campaign. The industrial implications were equally devastating. Each destroyed Panzer Mark Four represented 450 man-hours of skilled labour. Each Tiger tank required 2,000 man-hours to manufacture. The armour plate, engines and transmissions consumed scarce resources that German industry could not replace. By destroying German armour faster than it could be manufactured, American air power created a widening gap between German and Allied armoured strength that made ultimate German defeat inevitable. The tactical evolution that transformed the P-47 from escort fighter to tank destroyer occurred through a combination of American pragmatism and systematic analysis of combat results. Unlike German forces, which adhered rigidly to pre-war doctrine, American commanders encouraged tactical innovation and rapidly implemented successful techniques across all units. When pilots from the 358th Fighter Group discovered that attacking German tanks from the rear quarter increased kill probability, the technique was documented in after-action reports and disseminated throughout the 9th Air Force. When the 405th Fighter Group developed coordination procedures that allowed multiple flights to attack without interfering with each other, those procedures became standard operating practice. American military culture valued results over doctrinal purity, allowing rapid adaptation to battlefield realities. The mechanical reliability of the P-47 enabled this tactical evolution. Pilots could focus on perfecting attack techniques because they trusted their aircraft would function as designed. The R-2800 engine could absorb battle damage and continue operating. The aircraft's structure could withstand stress loads that would have destroyed lighter fighters. This reliability meant that pilot survival rates remained high even as missions became increasingly dangerous. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, survived 166 combat missions in Thunderbolts. His aircraft accumulated over 400 battle damage holes from flak and German defensive fire. The aircraft's survival, and his own, validated Republic Aircraft's design philosophy that prioritized robustness over maximum performance. German forces, attempting to understand why American air power proved so devastating, focused on technical specifications and missed the systemic advantages that made American dominance inevitable. German intelligence reports analyzed the P-47's engine power, armor protection, and firepower. They noted correctly that the Thunderbolt was heavier and less maneuverable than German fighters. What German analysts failed to grasp was that American air power derived its effectiveness from the integration of reliable machines, systematic training, overwhelming logistics, and tactical flexibility. The Roncey attack illustrated each of these advantages. The P-47 seconds that destroyed the German column were reliable enough to fly multiple sorties per day. Their pilots had received systematic training in ground attack techniques. American logistics could supply sufficient ammunition for sustained attacks. American tactical doctrine encouraged pilots to adapt their approach based on target characteristics and defensive capabilities. German forces possessed no equivalent system. Luftwaffe ground attack units like the Schlachtgeschwader flew obsolete aircraft with inadequate supplies. Their pilots received minimal training in ground attack techniques because the Luftwaffe prioritized air superiority missions. German tactical doctrine remained rigid, discouraging innovation that deviated from approved procedures. The cumulative effect of these disadvantages meant that even when German aircraft managed to attack Allied forces, they achieved minimal results at disproportionate cost. The broader strategic pattern extended far beyond Roncey. From D-Day until VE Day, Thunderbolt pilots claimed to have destroyed 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. These numbers, documented in official United States Army Air Forces reports, represented not exaggeration, but conservative estimates based on ground reconnaissance that confirmed pilot claims. The Falaise pocket itself, which closed between August 12 and 21, 1944, trapped between 80,000 and 100,000 German troops. Conservative estimates put the number killed at 10,000 to 15,000, with 40,000 to 50,000 captured. Allied air power, dominated by P-47 Thunderbolts operating from forward airfields, had created the conditions that made the encirclement possible and the escape impossible. General Dwight Eisenhower visited the Falaise battlefield 48 hours after the pocket closed and later wrote that it was unquestionably one of the greatest killing fields of any of the war areas. The narrow lanes that formed the final escape routes were littered with destroyed vehicles and corpses, physical evidence of sustained air attack that had continued for days without respite. The German perspective on these events revealed the profound psychological impact of facing overwhelming American air power. Wehrmacht officers captured during the Falaise operations described in interrogations how their units had disintegrated, not through ground combat, but through the relentless pressure of air attacks that made movement impossible and destroyed the will to resist. Oberleutnant Marten survived the Roncey attack. He walked east through Norman farmland for 3 days, moving only at night, hiding in barns and ditches during daylight when American aircraft owned the skies. He reached German lines near Argentan on August 1st and reported to his division headquarters. The staff officer who debriefed him asked about his unit's equipment status. Marten's response was simple and devastating. Everything was gone, the entire column, 66 tanks destroyed in a single afternoon by American aircraft. The staff officer made notes but said nothing. Similar reports were arriving from across the Normandy front. German armour was being destroyed faster than intelligence officers could update their maps. The systematic destruction of German mobile forces through air attack represented a revolution in military affairs that pre-war doctrine had never anticipated. The technical analysis of why P-47 attacks proved so effective revealed fundamental truths about the evolution of warfare. The 50 caliber Browning machine gun could not penetrate the frontal armour of German heavy tanks, but it did not need to. Attacking from above, P-47 pilots targeted the thin engine deck armour that measured between 20 and 30 millimeters thick. Armour-piercing incendiary rounds fired from 400 yards range possessed sufficient kinetic energy to penetrate these gratings and ignite fuel systems inside German tanks. German tank designers had focused their efforts on creating impenetrable frontal armour because pre-war doctrine assumed tanks would fight other tanks in frontal engagements. The concept of sustained aerial attack against armoured formations had been dismissed as theoretically possible, but practically unlikely due to the difficulty of coordinating air and ground operations. American forces had solved this coordination problem through superior communications, forward air controllers embedded with ground units, and logistics that kept fighter-bomber squadrons supplied and operational throughout sustained campaigns. The post-war analysis, conducted by both American and German military historians, confirmed that air power had become the decisive factor in the Battle of Normandy. In the Battle of Normandy from June 6 to August 31, 1944, Germans suffered upwards of 530,000 casualties, including 210,000 prisoners of war and the loss of over 2,100 aircraft and between 1,500 and 2,400 tanks and self-propelled guns. Allied casualties were less than half that number, and their equipment losses were more easily replaced. The disparity reflected not superior Allied ground combat capability, but the overwhelming advantage provided by air superiority that prevented German forces from maneuvering effectively or concentrating for counterattacks. The human cost of this transformation in warfare extended beyond casualty statistics. German soldiers who survived encounters with American air power carried psychological scars that affected their combat effectiveness for the remainder of the war. Veterans of the Normandy campaign, when transferred to other theatres, exhibited heightened stress responses and reduced willingness to operate in open terrain where air attack was possible. American pilots who executed these ground attacks also paid psychological costs, though of a different nature. Many Thunderbolt pilots described the emotional difficulty of strafing ground targets, where the results of their fire were immediately visible. Unlike high-altitude bombing, where destruction occurred at abstract distances, fighter-bomber pilots saw the vehicles they destroyed and the soldiers who died. Some pilots developed what modern medicine would recognize as combat stress reactions, requiring rotation to non-combat duties. The mechanical reliability of the P-47 proved crucial to sustaining operations throughout the campaign. The Thunderbolt had an exceptionally low rate of loss, 0.07 per mission, while Thunderbolt pilots racked up an impressive 4.6 to 1 aerial kill ratio. Of the 15,683 P-47 seconds built between 1941 and 1945, only 3,499 were lost in combat. This survivability stemmed from the aircraft's rugged construction and air-cooled radial engine that could absorb battle damage and continue functioning. Liquid-cooled engines, like those in most German fighters, would fail catastrophically if coolant lines were severed. The P-47's radial engine could lose multiple cylinders and still produce enough power to return the aircraft to base. This reliability meant that experienced pilots survived to accumulate combat experience that made them increasingly effective at their missions. The logistics supporting P-47 operations demonstrated American industrial capacity at its most impressive. Forward airfields in Normandy operated with efficiency that German observers found incomprehensible. Aircraft that landed with battle damage were repaired and returned to service within hours. Ammunition expenditure that would have exhausted German supplies for weeks was replenished overnight. Fuel availability never constrained operations. The entire system functioned with mechanical precision that reflected American organizational capabilities as much as American manufacturing capacity. By September 1944, German forces west of the Seine River had been destroyed as effective fighting formations. The survivors who escaped the Falaise pocket left behind virtually all their heavy equipment. Allied investigators estimated that Germans lost around 500 tanks and assault guns in the pocket, and that little equipment was taken across the Seine. The strategic implications of this destruction extended far beyond France. German industry could not replace the lost armour, the destroyed vehicles, or the killed and captured soldiers. The Wehrmacht's capacity to resist Allied advances across France and into Germany had been fundamentally broken by operations in Normandy, where American air power, dominated by P-47 Thunderbolts, had proven decisive. The lessons learned from these operations influenced military doctrine for decades. The concept of air-land battle, where air and ground forces operate in coordinated fashion to achieve objectives neither could accomplish independently, became central to American and NATO military planning. The P-47's success demonstrated that reliable, heavily armed aircraft operating with excellent logistics could achieve strategic effects through tactical operations. German military historians conducting post-war analysis identified several critical failures in Wehrmacht doctrine and planning. German commanders had underestimated American willingness to expend material resources. They had failed to anticipate the effectiveness of sustained air attack against ground forces. They had not developed adequate countermeasures to fighter-bomber operations. Most fundamentally, they had entered the war believing that tactical excellence and superior training could offset material disadvantages. The Battle of Normandy proved this assumption catastrophically wrong. The P-47 Thunderbolt's legacy extended far beyond World War II. During World War II, the Thunderbolt flew more than 500,000 missions and dropped 132,000 tons of bombs. Its reliability, firepower, and survivability established design principles that influenced fighter-bomber development through the jet age. The concept of building robust, heavily armed aircraft capable of absorbing battle damage became standard for American tactical aviation. The specific engagement at Roncey on July 29th represented one afternoon in a campaign that lasted months, but it demonstrated principles that determined the war's outcome. German forces with excellent equipment and veteran crews had been systematically destroyed by American air power that combined reliable machines, adequate tactics, and overwhelming logistics. The result was not a close contest decided by tactical brilliance, but an industrial demonstration where one side possessed resources the other could not match. Marten's war ended in a prisoner of war camp in England. He survived to return to Germany in 1946 and spent the rest of his life trying to explain to people who had not experienced it what American air power had been like in Normandy. He would describe watching P-47 seconds circle overhead for hours, attacking any vehicle that moved, destroying entire columns, making daylight movement impossible. People nodded politely but could not truly understand. The scale of American material superiority had to be experienced to be believed. The broader historical verdict on the P-47 Thunderbolt acknowledged both its strengths and limitations. It was not the fastest fighter. The P-51 Mustang had longer range and better high-altitude performance. It was not the most maneuverable. Lighter fighters could turn inside the Thunderbolt in close combat, but for the specific mission of ground attack in the environment of 1944 France, the P-47 proved ideal. Its ruggedness allowed aggressive tactics. Its firepower destroyed any target it engaged. Its reliability kept squadrons operational throughout sustained campaigns. Most importantly, American industry produced it in quantities that made it ubiquitous across every battlefield. The German soldiers who faced P-47 attacks learned to recognize the distinctive sound of the R-2800 engine and the sight of the massive fighter's silhouette. They developed no effective countermeasures beyond hiding and hoping the aircraft would select different targets. This helplessness, the knowledge that survival depended on luck rather than skill, eroded German combat effectiveness as surely as physical casualties. The final accounting of the Normandy campaign showed that American air power had achieved effects that pre-war theorists had considered impossible. German armies that should have required months of ground combat to defeat were destroyed in weeks through the systematic application of air power that prevented maneuver, interrupted supply, and destroyed equipment faster than it could be replaced. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.